Hi, welcome to our workshop this evening. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't been to one of our workshops before, welcome. Great to see you. If you don't know me, my name's Kerrin, or KG, as my handle is online. I work for Betfair in Australia, and I'm responsible for our automation team here at Betfair Oz. So we're responsible for growing automation on the exchange and everything that means. So we're the customer facing team that help to get access to historic data, to help you find the right tool for what you're trying to do, and to finesse your strategy and find a way for you to develop what you want to do on the exchange. So why are we here? Hopefully you've all heard my spiel before about us existing to create more winners. That's our mission here at Betfair in Australia. We firmly believe that a healthy and vibrant ecosystem is driven by winning customers. So the more we can do to help support you in doing that, the better it is for all of us. Tonight, we're here particularly because we're aware that a lot of what we've focused on before in these workshops and our meetups is probably on the upper end of a sophistication spectrum when it comes to a set of tech skills. So, when we've had data scientists in talking about their models, when we've had people in who have really strong dev backgrounds talking about how they've built their bots to automate on the exchange, that is absolutely excellent. But if you have no coding skills, that's probably a bit beyond where you're at right now to automate on the exchange. Luckily, there are actually lots of options available to automate on the exchange that don't require you to be able to code. And one of the most popular across both Betfair Australia and Betfair internationally is BetAngel. And it has an absolute screed of automation functionalities built in that will take you across a spectrum of automation needs. Now, I see automation on the exchange as a journey, not a destination. So often as your strategy develops, your needs develop. And what you need at the beginning isn't necessarily going to be the same thing you need at the end. And one of the beautiful things about BetAngel is because it's not a one size fits all, it has lots of different parts to it. And lots of different elements to the automations that you can build. So it can see you through multiple phases of that automation journey. So a couple of other, so that's the why, I guess. A couple other bits before I introduce Peter, who of all the guests I've had is probably the one who needs the least introduction. Just a couple of other bits and pieces. So if you aren't already part of the Betfair Quants Slack community, you're missing out. If you're interested in automation and modeling, it's a really thriving, engaged community-owned space where you can talk to other people who have similar interests, who are trying to learn to do similar things on the exchange. If you're keen on joining, you're welcome to. Open forum. I'll get Ivan to share a link in the chat. If you want to join, you can drop in there and find the conversation there. There will be, I imagine, a conversation going in the hashtag meetups channel on there, which is a great way to connect with other people in the community, particularly when we're not able to do it at the pub as we might in times past. More generally, like I said, we're really supportive of our community in Australia. And if we can help you, we want to do that. So please never be a stranger. Always feel comfortable to reach out to me and the guys, Ben, Ivan. If you hit up the automation@betfair.com.au email address, Ivan's just shared that down there. You're very welcome to. We can have a chat. We can see what we can do to help along the way. My motto is it never hurts to ask. So yeah, you can always ask and see what we can do. If you're watching this later and you're keen on an invite to Slack or anything like that, again, shoot us an email and we'll see what we can do. So I think that's about it. The other bit of housekeeping. So the Q&A box is open and will remain open. Hopefully you guys have lots of good questions. I know I've already had a couple come through which is excellent. But if you have any questions for Peter, please drop them in as you go, so that we can have a conversation instead of a presentation. That's more what we're here for. So without further ado, we've got Peter Webb joining us tonight. So again, of all the players on the exchange, he would be one of the best known, with one of the biggest profiles, I guess. Never shy of engaging with people or having a conversation. Peter's been on the exchange for over 2 decades. BetAngel has been around for over 15 years, which is an amazing length of time to survive in this ecosystem. Beyond being the founder of BetAngel, he also does a lot himself on the exchange, so can speak to a lot of what we're trying to do in this space with a bit more authenticity. So, Ben, if you can turn Peter's video on, I can see that. There we go. Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us and for getting up super early, because you're in England. So, what are you, 7 a.m.?
Yeah, I'm 7 a.m. and I'm not a morning person really. So
I wasn't either until I had a toddler. So,
but yeah, we all adapt, don't we? We all adapt.
You do, right? Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Really keen to go through what is currently available in BetAngel. I guess part of it being such an established platform and spanning such a long period of time and continuing to iterate and develop, it can be really easy to just pigeonhole in your head what you think the functionalities are. And that might have stopped a decade ago or 5 years ago, or at that point you last explored what's there. And you guys are always doing releases, so there are always new things coming out. So I'm really keen as part of this to explore what's it like now, in case for some of the people who are here, this may actually be different than last time they checked. But anyway, do you want to give a bit of background to you?
Yeah, sure. Shall I start sharing my screen now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so in terms of BetAngel, there is a lot to talk through. But what I'll try and do is summarize, and then we'll get some questions a bit later, so that people can ask questions that are more relevant or bear more relevance to them. But it is really the sort of function of a long journey. We continue to find interesting things to do with the product, interesting things to integrate and ways to update it. But it all sort of stems from where I originally came from. So I've been betting for over 30 years, which is an awful long time to do this. My interest came around because I picked up, I have Ed Thorpe to blame for this. I picked up a book called Beat the Dealer. And when I read that book, I got absolutely fascinated by it. And I just started dabbling basically all of that time ago. And I used some of my early knowledge within soccer markets to do some work betting on soccer pools in the UK. But my career back then was limited severely, because obviously we're talking about bookmakers and sports books sort of many, many years ago. And it wasn't particularly viable to pursue this for a living back then. So I drifted off to financial markets before eventually coming full circle and ending up on the Betfair exchange just after they opened for business. So I was one of the first customers of Betfair, but that was simply because I always had an interest in this area. And when I heard about the concept of betting against other people rather than a traditional bookmaker, my eyes just lit up, and I just thought, well, I've got to get involved in this. So yeah, I signed up for Betfair about a week after they opened for business. And within a few years, it had become big enough that I was able to quit my normal career, which was a bit of a shock to a lot of people, because I had a wife, 3 children, a mortgage, all of those things. And I just sort of said to people, yeah, I'm off to gamble for a living. So you can imagine the reaction that I got from that. But it was easily one of the best things I ever did, because it was something that interested me. And that helped make it a lot easier for me to be successful. In terms of Australian markets, I put on the screen up here, the very first Australian market that I ever attempted to trade was the Melbourne Cup in 2006. That was my introduction to Australian racing. But I didn't do particularly well that year. And I also had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was about -5 outside. And I'd set up an office in my garage. And so I had to crawl across a frosty lawn at 4 a.m. in the morning to be able to give it a go. But having learnt a little bit from that year, I've been pretty much trading Australian racing ever since then. And it's part of something that I do pretty much every week, and certainly around key times of the year.
You often, pre-COVID times, would come out for the Spring Carnival, wouldn't you?
That's correct. Yeah.
Back in the day.
COVID has been an absolute nightmare, because it means that I basically work right through the night for the last couple of years, and that's half killed me. And no matter how much I try and catch up on sleep, I don't seem to be able to do so. So I end up just almost sort of not sleeping for a week or so, maybe 10 days. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the proper end of the pandemic, so that I can start trading it again in a proper time zone.
You and us both. And when you end up here again, we will organise something in person, and I'm sure lots of these people would love to pick your brains over a pint or two. So I owe you. Let's see what we can do. Touch wood.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So yeah, over many years now, I've written tons of articles for Financial Times, Racing Head, Racing Post, Gambling Online magazine. I've probably written articles, I don't know how many I've written, hundreds probably, all to do with this, because I always feel an obligation to try and educate people. So I faced the prejudice when I first started of people not really truly understanding. And I think that you still see that a lot now. People don't realize the evolution that the betting market has gone through. So yeah, I've written quite a significant number of articles, and obviously produced videos and other stuff as well to try and help people understand exactly what I'm doing and why. But more importantly, for the purposes of what we're talking about today, we launched BetAngel in 2005. We don't consider BetAngel just a bit of software. We try and do all of the education behind it, always trying to find interesting and exciting things to do. So we fairly recently integrated live racecourse data into the product for racecourses in the UK. That took a lot of effort to be able to get that to the point where we felt it was something that we could do. But yeah, BetAngel was born out of the need to do clever things, basically. So I realized very soon after joining Betfair that, having worked in financial markets for a while, that I needed some of the tools that I could see there, but for betting markets. And that's why BetAngel was created. So we had to create it in an era before Betfair even had an API. So we had to screen scrape and do all sorts of clever stuff. And eventually Betfair did produce an API. And every time Betfair update or do something with the API, then we'll follow with a raft of new features. And we pretty much update it every 3 to 6 months with some new feature or customer feedback, or, you know, it's a continuous work in progress. And as a consequence, sorry,
just to be fair to you guys, like, it's not just that you update with features from Betfair. There are quite a lot of things that I gather you guys did first, like, you know, fill or kill bets, things that didn't actually exist on the exchange themselves. Yeah, you guys kind of hacked a way together to kind of make it work, and then Betfair followed suit, which I think is really cool. But a lot of this is actually you taking on the feedback that maybe we should have taken on, and then encouraging Betfair to implement it too, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, we did things like keep bets. We launched in 2006, I think it was. So the concept of carrying a bet from the pre-off period to an in-play period was something that we integrated into the product fairly early on. And I can't remember when Betfair launched that, but I know it was sometime later. So yeah,
things you take for granted, right?
yeah. And I mean, I don't know how many years it was before cash out started to appear as a common product, but obviously most traders and most software had that right from the off, basically.
2016-ish, I think. Like, it was relatively recent. So yeah, you guys definitely were the new ones on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've always been quite adventurous. We're always interested in trying to see where we can take the product and clever things that we can do. And we also realize that some people are going to be at a lower level. So that's why we have different versions of the software. So if you're not at the stage where you're going to use all of these tools, we do have simpler versions that will get you onto that first rung, and then you can step up from there.
But also, I mean, an awful lot of education. Like, I think, obviously, we get asked a lot which tools people should go and look at, and ask recommendations a lot. And obviously, you want to recommend horses for courses, but it really helps the amount of educational materials that you guys have produced, the amount of community there is and community content. Like, that makes it very easy to recommend, because you're not just throwing someone out without a life raft.
Yeah,
which is really great. Like, it can certainly be a little bit overwhelming because there is so much of it, but definitely better that than the other extreme, in my opinion, anyway.
yeah, and we try and strike the balance as well between showing people how to use the software and talking about the markets. So I think that when you understand how the markets work, you'll understand why the software was designed in a certain way. That sort of it begins to make sense. The penny drops when you begin to understand why certain features exist, given the way that certain markets behave. So yeah, we try and strike the balance between the two. And obviously there's the forum as well, where we upload examples and you can talk to other traders and stuff like that. So yeah, we consider that it a holistic thing. It would be easy just to push the software out there, but I think it requires all of that ecosystem to be able to be effective, really.
I agree. I don't think, you're certainly, BetAngel is one of the most popular tools in Australia, and I think that is in part reflective of that it's not just the tool.
Sure. I'll just quickly whiz through a couple of things. BetAngel started very simply. We've got standard tools on there if you want to do some basic trading, and then it goes all the way up to advanced automation, which we're going to talk about in a second. You can completely customize it. So every single aspect of it can be customized, so that if you want to tweak it some way, it's possible to do that. And I think that's important, so that you get your own unique view on the market. So whether you want to trade at a simplistic level or you want to do something a lot more complex, we're trying to bridge the gap between all of those. And the feature that a lot of people use now is the automation. And in the very early years, it wasn't possible to do stuff as complex as this because the API couldn't handle it. But it's now possible that you can write some quite complex rules to automate your betting or your trading. And we include things like the ability to pull data in through a CSV file. You can do stuff like, if you're an existing coder, you can do stuff like variables, you can nest or group commands, you can do all sorts of clever things without the complexity of having to learn the API. So the way that we approached it was basically to look at, how do we allow people to be able to automate common functions without the need to code. So we've basically taken effectively what you could almost define as a coding language, but we've made it just a point and click UI. And that allows us also to be able to get people to import stuff. So we've got literally hundreds of examples on the forum. So if you want to perform a particular task, it's quite likely we've designed some automation that's fairly similar. You can bring it into BetAngel and then modify it to suit. But fundamentally speaking, if you don't know how to code, or even if you are a coder, but you just want to experiment on something quickly without having to write the code, then the automation should be able to do that for you.
And you have a dev background yourself too, don't you? So you are speaking A, from experience, but B, with that lens to what you do, not just the figurehead. not to diss figureheads, but it definitely helps when you know what you're doing, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I originally started out as a coder many years ago, and sort of as my career developed, I ended up taking on more responsibility, and you sort of end up losing to some extent your original coding roots. But when we designed BetAngel, one of the things that I thought about was I was thinking, well, shall I code it myself, or shall I find somebody that's a bit younger than me, that is got all of the latest standards but speaks the same language as me? So that's quite beneficial. I think it allows you to get a deeper understanding of exactly what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, and I use the automation myself now. So it's sort of developed continuously in conjunction with our customers and requests that we've received from them. But yeah, I run automation pretty much 24/7 now. It's doing something somewhere at some point during the day. And obviously it's a key feature of the product now.
Awesome. Well, have you got any more on this, or do you want to do a bit of a screen share?
I think if we go into
Please.
BetAngel, we can start to have a look.
So are we going to take this from an approach of, if you think of this as a journey, simple through more complicated? Is that the way we're looking at the different bits, or?
Yeah, I think probably the best way. I'm assuming you can see everything here, okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I can see the ladder interface.
I think from a trading perspective and from a customer perspective, it's important to understand how it all sort of fits together. So there are actually several key elements that work together to be able to deliver all of the things that you see. So if I talk you through the general how it all plugs together, and then we can look specifically at some automation and some of the functions within the automation so that you can get a proper deep understanding of exactly how it works. So what you're looking at the moment is basically just the standard one-click screen, the grid interface. You can see that we've modified some elements of it, and I've done this deliberately so that we can look at this and see how that all sort of ties together in a second. But when you look at the main BetAngel screen, this is basically just one part of everything that you can do. And on this main screen, you can obviously bring up the one-click screen, the ladder interface. You've got manual betting, Dutching, bookmaking. But you also have things like the Excel tab. So the concept with the Excel tab is that if you link BetAngel to Excel, then you can actually bring up a market and populate it onto an Excel screen. So if I'm just going to reconnect this actually. I'm going to have to close it down and bring it back up again.
All right.
It's because I was testing it last night. So
it's always how it goes, right?
Yeah, no, I left it open. I should have closed it and reconnected it. So you can see here, basically, when you hook into Excel, if you're a VBA coder or you've got any sort of coding experience, then the link to Excel basically allows you to replicate what you see on the main BetAngel screen. So BetAngel is acting as the conduit, the hub, basically between Betfair and Excel. And you can actually, this is an important thing to point out, with all features on BetAngel, they all run simultaneously. So the way that we've written BetAngel is that there's an engine that sits behind it that interfaces to the Betfair API. And then that engine is responsible for spreading the content and the information out to whatever interface you're using. So if you're using Guardian, Excel, one-click screen, the ladder, all of that data is arriving simultaneously across all of those platforms. So it's perfectly possible to use one screen, but also to do stuff within Excel, and they will all interact together. So you don't have to use them in isolation. They can supplement each other.
What if you wanted to do them in isolation? So say that you wanted an automation to run through Excel, but you also wanted to be able to trade manually and you didn't want the two lots of bets to consider each other. Is there a way to do that, or does that require two accounts?
You'd have to have two accounts to do that. Cool. So,
I
mean, you can add another layer of complexity that would allow you to do that, but probably the quickest and simplest way to do it is to isolate it into two accounts. That would be the best way to do it. But yeah, the Excel interface basically has all of the data that you would see on the main one-click screen. But what you can actually do here is you can see additional information that it can actually pump down to Excel, such as the bet reference ID, all of the data that you need to be able to actually actively use Excel to be able to completely automate your trading. And you can see at the top here, we've also got a set of rules. So this is like a pseudo code within Excel So rather than you having to actually trigger a bet to the API, you can just enter a string in there, and you can sort of say back, or you can say back, fill or kill, back, lay, offset, hedger position, cancel, take SP. You can do all of these sort of functionality within there. If I put this in, it will throw an error because basically we haven't entered in the odds, the stake, or all of it. But basically, you can enter in a string here that will allow you to interact with BetAngel and therefore the Betfair API. So the Excel interface is actually quite a simple way of pulling down data and then being able to act on it. So you could, the main BetAngel sheet pulls in the data and reports, but you could actually open a secondary sheet and then you can just cross-reference a cell on another sheet. So it would be perfectly possible for you to be able to pull in data in like a basic form and then manipulate it, produce charts, gather data, act upon information that's coming through the market.
We've got a tutorial I wrote years ago. Maybe Ivan, you can share a link on the Automation Hub that talks about how to use BetAngel to automate a set of ratings, and it's using this interface Excel sheet. That's the flow that we followed. And maybe Ivan, if you share a link, then anyone who's keen to have a look, that might talk through some of the flow. Question for you. So one of the things that sometimes tripped me up a little bit in my use of BetAngel, and this is probably on how I was doing it, was if I wanted a strategy to bet more than once. So if I wanted to back and then lay and then back again, or that when I needed to go away and clear a cell, how would you go? Because that's the flow, right? That you really need. I'd go and do a VBA logic flow that would then, clear all the cells in column L after X, and then look at the matched bets and sort of circular logic like that. Is that the way that you do it, or is there something that I was missing when I was playing around and having a go?
No, that is correct, because the problem when we first released the Excel link, which was some time ago actually, the problem that people would have is they would end up triggering lots of bets in quick succession. So if you allow Excel to trigger a bet, so the way that it works within BetAngel is interrogating these cells here, and it's taking instruction from those particular cells. And if it detects that there's no activity there, then it knows that it's primed and ready to start placing a bet. But when it does place a bet, then it will actually give you the status here indicating that a bet has been placed. Yep. And then you need to clear that status in order to re-trigger it. Because if you don't do that, then it will just fire bets in. So that's actually like a safety feature within Excel to stop you from like emptying your bank within 30 seconds and then trying to figure out what on earth happened.
Oh, we've all done that, right? When you're you're building your own bot and your loops aren't quite right. We've all been there.
Yeah, so that is actually a safety feature on the basis that you have to clear the status in order to be able to say, yeah, I'm ready to go again.
No, definitely makes sense.
But as we put the Excel interface in fairly early on in the history of BetAngel, but we realized that exactly what you've just said there are a few things that you still need that sense of logic and that approach to understand the structure of what you need to do, which is sort of why we introduced the automation, because on the automation, we have a different approach to the way that you would necessarily trigger a bet into the market. And the concept of rearming and having a defined boundary means that the automation works slightly differently. It actually took us a lot of time to think it through, because when you think through the logic of how you're going to participate in the sports market, it tends to be time limited or score limited. So if you know a horse race, so for example, this next race that's coming up here is going to go off in roughly 15 seconds time. So you know that your window of opportunity will be from when you arrive at the market to when you exit. So when we design the automation, it's almost like, rather than a piece of code where it's line numbered, effectively we're making it time based. So it's either a certain amount of time before the start of an event or a certain amount of time after the start of an event. And as a consequence, the way that we structure the automation is a little bit different. But we'll come on to that in a second. I'll explain how that particularly works so that it makes perfect logical sense.
Logical.
But yeah, it's the Excel interface is if you're a coder and you want to do something quickly, we provide you the conduit to Betfair, to the API. And then you can play around with your heart's content, but it requires a little bit more work than you would do typically with the advanced automation.
Cool. I do like the visual element, that I think that one of the problems of building your own bot often is that there isn't a UI, and that you don't, it can be so hard to know what's going on. Whereas this gives you that graphical frame of reference. And particularly when you're developing a strategy and a logic flow, that's super valuable. And I think, as you said, even if you are a dev and you do have the capacity to build something from scratch, that doesn't always mean that that's the best thing to do early on. There's definite value in going through the flow, I think.
Yeah, and I think that one of the advantages, especially if you are a coder, if you're doing any development work, is that the way that we've designed BetAngel is you should be able to do 99% of the same things that you would do if you were coding yourself. But obviously you have to shortcut all of the structure, basically, because we've done all that hard work for you. And if Betfair tweak the API, then we do all of that hard work as well in tweaking it at our end. But also the way that we've approached it is in a sort of a coding context, but simplified so that it's easier to understand and to implement. So even if you were coding, you could probably use BetAngel to test some idea. I'm sure you've been through this loop before, where you suddenly wake up in the morning thinking, why haven't I thought of that before? And it gives you the ability to be able to implement that very, very quickly and in a manner that means that it's very unlikely to have any coding errors, but you'll be able to get instant feedback on whatever crazy idea that you've just had.
There's a lot of value to that.
Yeah. So I'll take you back to the main interface and explain some of the automation, because there are really two key elements to the automation. We have a sort of a process-driven automation, which is basically along the lines of if this, then that. But you would tend to create that to be specific to a certain strategy or a certain market. But we also have some automation that's context-driven. So to describe what that is, basically, if you have some automation that you want to apply to a market, but you don't know what market you want to apply it to or what selection within that market, you can actually apply automation in that manner as well. So you can either do a complete piece of automation from start to finish, or if you are turning up to market, you can make a decision on the selection that you want to trade or how you want to trade it, and then you can actually invoke automation using that context. So you can actually do both on BetAngel. And the idea is the context-driven automation is a bridge from doing manual trading to doing fully automated trading. It allows you to make that step through that particular process. So nearly all of my automation strategies start with me, for want of a better word, playing around with the market. And then when I figure out that I've got a strategy that I want to automate, the next step is to semi-automate it via the context-driven automation. And then eventually that tips over into just completely automating it.
I know I've got clients I've worked with who are primarily manual in what they do, but they understand the markets enough whereby they know what they're looking for, and they don't necessarily feel that they can automate finding the signal, I guess.
Yeah.
But have used this part of the automation feature, tied it to a custom column, and then have, at the point at which I click this, I want this automation to fire and do X, Y, Z. And they use that as part of their manual trading arsenal, that they will do their normal trading. But then in this circumstance, they'll click that, and then they want that to flow, particularly some of the guys who, everyone latency matters, but particularly if you're trading in play, and racing, it really does matter being fast.
Very much so.
People who definitely.
And the great thing is, when you use context-driven automation, you can get it to sort of error check what you're doing. So, when you press that button finally, it can do that final check to sort of say, is this the case? Is that the case? Am I happy with that position? Off you go. And obviously there's a speed benefit as well. So it's a nice bridge between the two. And I'll readily admit that I do trade manually. I trade semi-automatically, and I have completely automated strategies. And they sort of one evolves from another. And if you can do that, then why not? So I'll often have simultaneous strategies running on the same market, but on different accounts, basically, all looking for slightly different things and achieving slightly different objectives. But yeah, let me talk you through I'll talk you through how the advanced automation works so that you can understand that concept and the way that you should be using it. And then we'll drop it back into looking at the context-driven stuff. Yep. But you can actually see on this screen, there's additional data that I'm displaying here. And we'll have a look at this automation in a second. But this is being driven by automation. So it's looking at the market, it's making decisions and gathering data on the market, and then displaying that for me to see. So this is another way that people should be using automation, is if you're looking for something specifically in the market, then by creating a rule that gathers that information for you, you can get it displayed right in front of you. And if you want to act on that information, then you can click away on the screen, or even on the ladder, you can display the information up here as well. So gathering information in automation, that's correct, and then displaying it elsewhere is something that's hugely beneficial when you're actively trading as well. But when you look at BetAngel itself, you've got the main interface that we're looking at the moment. But if we actually click on Guardian, you've probably seen me do this a couple of times already. Guardian is almost a completely different piece of software. So Guardian spawns another part of BetAngel, and we've designed Guardian so that it can actually run in the background. So you can actually see that I've got some automation running on here called movement. I can't remember if I've called it movement tracker. There we go. Yeah. And what that is actually doing is it's gathering data from all these markets in front of me, and then it's displaying that information on the one-click and the ladder screen. So it's perfectly possible to run multiple automation rules. So you can have one gathering data, one that's trading automatically, and all of these sort of things, or one that's looking for a specific strategy and one that's doing something else. But you can actually run them all simultaneously at the same time. And they can run together and do all sorts of clever things for you. So I've actually got one looking for certain amounts of data and displaying it, but there's no reason if I go into the automation column 2 that I could run any of these other bits of automation at exactly the same amount of time.
How many? Is there a limit to the number of automations you can have on one market?
There are 5 that you can run simultaneously at the moment, but you could merge all of these together if you wanted to. So if you wanted to create some sort of automation mega file, there's no reason why you couldn't actually merge all of those bits together into one massive file. But what we tend to find is that you tend to apply certain different bits of automation to different markets. So yeah, you can do up to 5 different types of automation at any one point or another.
When you were saying data gathering, is that just for the sort of devs and for, I guess, clarity, is that effectively like tracking a variable? So I know that on your previous screen you had VWAP for the last 20 minutes. So you're trying to look at the volume averaged, the weighted average price taken in the last 20 minutes, I assume, from the column that I'm looking at. Are you saying that column is being populated by an automation? Is that effectively what you mean by populating the data?
Correct, yeah. So if, for example, the Guardian does a lot of things. So as well as automation, you can get Guardian to drive multiple markets into different parts of your spreadsheet. So I haven't got a spreadsheet linked up here, but if you wanted to put each one of these markets into a separate sheet within the workbook within Excel, you could do that.
We've got a tutorial on that too.
Yeah, you've got watch lists, all sorts of other clever stuff, which I'll show you in a second. But the core fundamental part of Guardian is twofold. One is finding markets that you're interested in, and the other one is sort of automating them. Yeah. So I don't know if you've done any tutorials on the filter before or not. Or...
No, not really. That's sort of mainly been just using odds racing.
Okay, so I'll go over that briefly. I won't spend too long on it. But you can see with Inside Guardian, what we've actually got are a whole list of different markets. So these are the markets overnight my time that were being run in Australia today. And then you can see that as we go down, then it gradually transitions into the UK racing that's going to start in a few hours' time or so. But when you load up Guardian, in order for Guardian to be able to act on information, you need to be able to populate Guardian with all of these markets. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, we actually have a thing called a filter. And what you can actually do is you can create a custom filter to be able to bring all of these markets into Guardian. So rather than you sort of looking for all of the races at Randwick or Doomben or Sandown or wherever, and then gradually moving them across or indicating that you want to put them into Guardian. What you can actually see on the left-hand side here is these are all pre-selected for me, and it's just a case of me dragging and dropping these into Guardian. And in order to do that, I've used a filter. So these are the filters that I've got currently loaded into Guardian. I've got all racing, Australian racing, French racing, group and listed racing in Australia, different tennis markets, variations. These are all variations on a theme. So if I did French racing, we can see that there's only one meeting on Betfair in France today. If I did Australian racing, you can see we've got all of the racing for today and tomorrow. Yep. And if I do all racing, then obviously it would just bring up every market that's available today, which would include the UK as well. So when you design a filter, the filter is designed to just get you to all of the key markets that you're interested in without you having to mess around, basically. You can display all of that information immediately.
Am I right that you then need to drag and drop that across? You can't effectively automate the market selection?
No, Betfair discourage us from doing that. So because there are about 20,000 markets a day that are listed on Betfair. So it's a manual process. You have to select the market and then pull it across. If you use some macro-based tools, you can automate it.
Yeah. Just
but
using the filter.
in terms of our implementation with the API, that isn't something that we've done, simply because the way that Guardian works is you could have thousands of people with thousands of markets pummeling the API repeatedly. So we need to sort of present it in a more sanitized format.
Can you, at some point now or later, up to you, but speak to the difference between using polling data versus stream data?
Yeah. So I'm on streaming. I'm on streaming here.
Yeah, but is that by default or is that an option?
You can choose either, but we would recommend that you use streaming. So I'll show you in a second, actually, when we look at Guardian, why that is of a significant advantage. But yeah, you can see I've set up a filter. I'm not going to go in great depth on here. If you want to look at the filter function, we've got examples on the forum that you can use. You can download all of these examples, but basically you can specify country types, you can specify market types, you can filter by text, and then you can basically import, export, or save that filter. And then when you come to import loads of markets into Guardian, it's just a question of coming over here, selecting it from the menu, and then just dragging and dropping those items straight into Guardian. And then you can start working on the markets from there. But once the markets are loaded into Guardian, what you actually have is the Guardian. My Zoom bar is in the way. I'm just going to move it out of the way.
Always, right?
Yeah, it's always in the wrong place, isn't it? But what Guardian is doing is it's basically going through each one of these markets and then checking if the market is active, if you have any automation rules on the markets, and it's basically working its way down this list. So it's effectively looping through this entire list. It's scanning each market that you have within Guardian, checking to see what instructions you've given it, and then it's acting upon those instructions. So if we go to the Markets tab, you can see at the moment the refresh interval is 1 second. So basically every 1 second, It's going to look at each one of these markets, gradually cycle through the list until it reaches the bottom, and then go back to the top of the market. So you were just saying, sorry,
Peter, I was just saying, in terms of the refresh on an individual market, does that mean that for any given market, it's being refreshed once every n seconds, n being the number of markets you have on that list?
Correct. But there are a couple of things you can do that will influence that. Mm-hmm. So if you switch on streaming and you have streaming activated via the communications settings within BetAngel, then you can get it to check 50 times a second, basically. So if I switch that to 20 milliseconds, it's rocketing through these markets and checking each one of these markets and the instructions you've given it 50 times a second. So obviously, if you've got 50 markets, it will check every single market at least once a second.
From a Betfair perspective too, we really do prefer people using streaming data. It's a win-win, right? It's better in terms of our data optimization. It's better in terms of the amount of data that the end user gets. Like, it's just, yeah. Stream is definitely the way to go.
And if you're using automation, then you should use streaming because it's much more efficient. The data gets pushed from Betfair. We can read it faster, display the information faster, act on it faster. It's just better, full stop, basically. You can also restrict the refresh as well. So if you want it to look within a certain window, so if there are markets coming up in the next hour, you can actually get Guardian just to cycle through the markets within that time window. It will just cycle through them super fast. So there are options that will allow you to manipulate the way that Guardian presents and looks at all of that data within here. But I'll make this point again. But once you've loaded it into Guardian, you can actually shut down Guardian, and it will still be gathering data from those markets. So despite the fact it's not displayed on the screen, it will just continuously update. So you can see this market at Belmont is suspended, it's closed, it's inactive. Guardian is still working on all of the other markets for us. Simply because we're not looking at it doesn't mean that it's not active.
Okay.
It runs completely independently. So if we look at, we'll bring up the next race. How long have we got on here? We've got about 2 minutes, so maybe I'll do it on the market that's immediately afterwards. And you can just see I'm just double clicking on a market to skip backwards and forwards between the main interface and Guardian. If you right click, you can actually do a whole load of other things. So if you want to display another screen, whether it's a one-click, a ladder, or other information within there, if you right click, there's a context menu that allows you to do all sorts of other things. So
that's great.
Again, I won't explain all of this, but if you want to play with it, it's perfectly possible to do that. So if I just double click on this race at Sandown, you can see it gathering data and pushing information to us on this particular screen. So if we dive into the automation, I can show you basically how it's doing that and the way that you would particularly write a rule within automation. If we look at this particular piece of automation, it's called Movement Tracker. And as the name suggests, it's basically looking at how the market's moving. It's calculating the volume weighted average price, and then it's relaying and overlaying that to exactly what's happened within the market. And if we want to look at this particular rule, what we can do is go to the automation section on Guardian. We can select it from the drop-down menu. You can see I've got various other things within here as well. And if I just edit that rules file, it will actually bring up the file that we're using to gather this piece of information. So this will allow me, if I just resize this a little bit to make it a little bit clearer. Trying not to close it down. Let's do it.
Yeah. That's great.
I can explain to you exactly how it's working and exactly what it's doing within here. So the way that we've created the automation is you can actually effectively create a container which you would name as the piece of automation that you would want to have. So it could be Kerrin's amazing piece of automation. You would then save that as a file. And then within that container, you actually list a set of rules. So on this particular rule at the top here, you can see that it stores the implied probability percentage value at 20 minutes. And you can see that it does that at -20, in other words, 20 minutes before the start of the event. And it will continue to do that until the event is about to start. What it's actually doing is setting or modifying a stored value. So it's basically creating a variable. You can create named variables within here. It's got no conditions within it, and it does it once at 20 minutes, basically. So this is a summary of the rule that we've created, but in order to create the rule, you would use this tab below here. So you can see we've just named it something that reminds us exactly what it is. Then you can actually select a rule type. So that this is the range, that there are a lot of them. So again, I won't explain all of them, but I'll give you some context in terms of what is available to you. But these are all of the rule types available to you. So you can place a back bet, a lay bet, you can lay all, back all, take an SP bet, close a selection on a trade, you can hedge all of your positions, you can take SP, you can export information from the market, you can create an alert, so you can either show a message or play a sound. There's a lot of different things that you can do there. If you're looking for an opportunity within a market and you've loaded them all into Guardian, you can actually get the automation as well to switch to a market. So you can say, this is what I'm looking for. These are the criteria that it needs to meet. And it could play you an alert or play a sound, send a message, or switch you to that market if it finds an opportunity. You can see here, connect race to total performance data. This is the live race course data that we implemented recently. And you can see other,
about that in a minute.
Sure. You can see there are other functions within here. Start and stopping servants, setting a stored value, in other words, creating a variable, clearing it, exporting it. There's like an almost infinite number of things that you can do in terms of rule types. So rather than having to code an instruction to Betfair via the API, you can just basically go to the menu, press a button and say, I want to place a back bet. It's sort of that simple, really. Or you can say, I want to create a variable. And then you can sort of just select it from the drop-down menu and away you go from there. The rule trigger times, when I was talking about this earlier, basically you're saying, this is the window in which I want this rule to operate. It's going to be a certain amount of time before the start of an event, or a certain amount of time during the event, or any of that particular context. So it's a sort of a time-driven automation. You say to it, this is the window in which I want you to operate. Arm the trigger at 20 minutes out until 0. And when you were talking about the status clearing in Excel and how you had to go through that process, in automation, you can actually specify how many times you want the rule to trigger, and it will automatically arm, disarm, according to whatever that criteria is. So you can see here, we've said on this particular rule, trigger it once, and we're going to do it on every selection. So you can actually change the context of what you want it to apply to, whether you want it to apply to a very specific connection, whether you want it to apply to all of them, some of them, according to whatever you want, basically. You can do whatever you want within that particular period. And it's related to when the event starts.
Question on the start time. Obviously, especially outside of the UK, a lot of races run late. Is that scheduled start time or actual start time, or both? It's both, isn't it? It's scheduled for before and then actual for after. Is that
correct? Yeah, you've got that correct. So, I mean, actually, the Australian racing seems to go off on time more often than the UK. The average race in the UK, yeah. I've actually gathered data on it, because when you're optimizing automation, you want it to stay in the market for as long as possible. So I know if an Australian race hasn't gone off after about 90 seconds, there's probably a problem somewhere.
Actual delay.
Yeah, there's a real delay.
So another question.
Yep.
So you talked about the TPD data, and I'm interested in discussing that. But before that, have you integrated the race status API into your GBIR feeds? Because that lets you have an additional set of inputs to determine when the race starts. It's something I'm very sore on, because we don't have it for Australia. It's one of my bucket list. But getting the sort of the going behind, loading the last, those signals come from the race status API. Is that something that's integrated yet or on the wish list?
It's on the wish list. We have actually messed around with it in development, but we found it we haven't particularly needed it. So from a market trading perspective, the volume dies past post time. So we see a very defined volume curve in terms of activity within the market. And once you go past that 90-second window, the volume just evaporates. So we've sort of, most of the automation that you would tend to do is geared around that volume, because if you're putting a $500 bet in when the market's doing $1,000 a second, that's a comfortable amount to actively trade. But if you're trying to do a $500 trade 3 minutes after post, it's completely inappropriate. So most of the automation that you tend to create is based around volume, curiously enough, and volume is a good indicator as to at what stage we're at in terms of where the race is likely to be. So we have looked at it, but we're not completely convinced of its value. But if people want it, it would be something that we'd be happily implement for people.
I know something we're desperate for in Australia, just because it's very hard to know when things are jumping.
I have to say, the Australian racing is incredibly prompt. I mean, it's better than the UK, and anything is better than the US racing.
Don't get me started. TPD, that's one potential solution there. I think the beauty of the Australian market is because we have a country that watches racing, you can, to a large extent, trust the over-round. Yeah. So I know most of the automations that not only I run, but I work with people on, rely very heavily on the back market percentage, because you're using the wisdom of the crowd. Yeah. Those people who are watching Sky and waiting for the jump, and they know how close it is, and an awful lot of the money comes from people with that as one of their data feeds, be it manually or however they're getting it. And that's what we leverage to a large extent. That's obviously much harder on UK racing because the market's more efficient and they're rounder for further and further out. So, you're more likely to have that 102, 103% for the previous X minutes or hours before, whereas ours, tightens quite close to. So, it's an interesting double-edged thing. But obviously, I don't do a lot in GB, but
if you look at the spread on the book percentage on Australian and UK racing, it's a good indicator as to what stage of the race they're at, and they track and follow in quite a similar manner. So you tend to find the narrowest spread is at or around just before they're due to start. When it begins to expand, that's an indication that people who were going to place a bet are no longer placing it and are pulling their orders from the market.
Question: when you were going through the type of bets to place there, I noticed that I couldn't see limit SP on there. So I can see convert to SP or straight BSP bets. Do you offer a limit SP option? So BSP with a limit on it?
I am pretty sure that we do, although you've caught me on the hop there because I couldn't immediately point you to it. Someone called out to me that it wasn't there. It wasn't something I'd gone looking for. But I just called out to me that it wasn't, but I don't know whether that's been included or not. Yeah, I'm just trying to think whether we've, because I've seen the new version that we're going to release in about a week or two's time. So I'm thinking that it could be on there. Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. But I'm pretty sure we did implement a request for that because it was something that was missing in a prior version. Yeah. But again, if it's not in there, then it would be something relatively easy to do. Probably, but I'm pretty sure if it's not in this one, then it will definitely be in the next version. I've just had someone message me saying it's been added very recently, and it's a bit hard to find, but it is there. So that's excellent. Yeah. It's good. It's great when your customers know your product. Don't get much better than that. I was pretty sure we'd implemented it at some point. That's awesome. Question on this. So someone's asking what I was speaking to around the TPD data. So that's a fairly recent integration into the software, relatively. Can you just speak a little bit to what it is and how it might be utilized in here, and whether it can be used to predict an imminent start as well as in play? Yeah, sure. What I'll do is I'll just round off what we're talking about here, and then
sorry.
I'll go back through and show you. We'll look at a rule-based function of the TPD data, and then I can talk a little bit more in depth about that. So that wouldn't be a problem to do that. What I'll just do here is just talk you quickly through some of the other functionality that we've got on here as well, because as well as the rule types that you would place within there, each rule will come with a parameter. So as you change the rule type, you'll get a parameter that determines how that rule is implemented. So if you're placing a back or lay bet, you can see you've got a billion different options in terms of how you can place that bet and at what price you would choose to place that particular bet. Mm-hmm. If, for example, I'm just looking here for an example. Yeah, so set stored values using a file, for example, if you look at the parameter that appears there, what you can do, you can actually create a variable within automation that derives its values from a CSV file. So you can see the parameter has changed here to say, can you tell me where that file is?
So basically, if you had a set of ratings, you could pull it in from a spreadsheet into this automation feature, not just direct into the Excel interface.
That's correct. Excellent. Yeah, you create. We have a default template CSV file that's structured in a way that you can either do string matching, or you can specifically name the selection that you want, and then you can name the price and other information, and it will just pull it straight into the automation.
I think we should probably have a tutorial on that sometime, adding that to our automation hub.
Yeah, there's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of depth. Definitely. And you can see here, play sound alert, show message. When you select that, you can see the whole new range of options there. So you can nominate a sound file. You can show a pop-up alert. So every single bet type that you place or every interaction that you have will show you a different set of parameters based upon what you would expect to see. And then you can also apply conditions. So there's a whole host of conditions that you can apply as well to each individual bet. So the structure is you nominate exactly what you want to do and the time at which you want to do it. You nominate how you want to do it, and then you can actually apply conditions to it. So the conditions are related to if it's at this price, if the market's in play, if it's not in play, if it's within this particular range, if there's a certain amount of time elapsed since I placed my last bet, the draw, how the distance of the race. And you can see here for tennis, you can do it related to tennis scores, but you can also make it related to variables that you've previously stored. So the automation can be iterative. You can basically set a variable. You can say to it, when this happens, create this variable, add or subtract to it. You can do all of the mathematics, the multiplication, the division, and then that can feed back to itself. So you can get it to loop effectively and do all of the functions that you'd expect to be able to do in a conventional coding platform. It's just we're doing it in a visual manner, basically. So you can see, I'm not going to talk through each one because it would take hours. But you can also group the conditions as well. So you can basically nest and loop the conditions. So you can make it multi-disciplinary. You can say, if it's in play, if this is the case, if it's at that price, if this is the case, if the variable that I've stored is this value, and this is the case, then do the following. And then you can actually, you can and, or you can or those groups together. So you can get really deep in here. You can do an awful lot. But again, it's all visually based so that it's easy to construct the rule in a logical manner.
And you said you can also import other people's rules too. And that might be a good learning curve, right? Starting with something that someone else has done so that you're not starting with a blank slate, which I imagine could be intimidating.
Yeah, very much so. And that's why we've got probably about 300 example files on the forum now. And they start from place a bet at SP to doing incredibly complex and stuff that's sort of quite advanced. But the idea is that whatever your level is, there'll be a file that you can basically import. And most people learn the automation by taking an existing file and then just basically reading through each of the files, or each of the rules rather, and then it all begins to make sense and understand the way that it's been constructed. So you can see on here, this particular part of the rules file updates the current volume weighted average price, but compares it to a prior, the opening volume weighted average price. So it uses a little bit of maths, a little bit of information that's stored to produce the final value. Sorry, you were going to talk.
I was just going to say, for obviously with automation, however you're automating, the complexity and the intimidation factor can be quite a steep learning curve and barrier of entry. And it's, even though BetAngel, I think, has done a very good job of making it so much more accessible. You know, I do know from the outside what people say, that it's still intimidating. And of course, one of my favorite things is complicated problems have complicated solutions. So, you know, there's only so much that you can simplify. However, what would your guidance be to someone who was committed, was prepared to do the legwork, wanted to learn how to automate, go through that journey, like we said at the beginning, and build through it? Where would you send them? Would you send them to the academy? Would you send them to the forum? Would you just throw them and go, just start with this rule and build? What would your guidance be on, again, like I said, yeah, BetAngel's been around a long time. So it's not, I've been on the forums and there are so many different posts and threads, and it's awesome, but you don't know where to start. What would your guidance be in terms of what that journey could look like to make it a bit more accessible?
I think it depends what level you're at with your trading, because if you understand the concept of trading and exactly specifically what you're trying to do, then I think the best path of entry is to download some of the simpler automation files that we have on the forum, and then to actually have a look at those, because the logic will then fall into place. But if you start with a really simple rule, which is place a bet 5 to 10 minutes out before the start of a horse race and hedge it at the open, then that should give you the confidence that you are approaching it in the right sort of manner. And then you sort of build things from there. So most of the automation that I've created started from a really simplistic perspective, and then I've just horribly complicated it over many years. So
we've all done that.
You end up with this thing that works really well, but you can't remember why you created it in the first place.
Or necessarily quite how you got there. I think that's I guess was part of my question, was
and you sort of end up branching it. So you start with something very simplistic, and then you modify it because you want to solve a specific problem, and then you modify the modification, and then you sort of end up with 3 different things from that really simple start. But most of the people I've spoken to, when I've been talking to customers about the automation, they've started generally by downloading a file and understanding how it works. And then some of the files we've got are quite complex, but they're designed to solve specific problems. So avoid those to start with, because that will probably be confusing. But just start with some of the really simple ones, bring them into BetAngel, run them, because we've sanity checked them and tested them to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. And then you can sort of start to build out from there.
Does BetAngel offer a testing/paper trading mode? And that's a question I get a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So everything that you see here can be run in practice mode. So it's really, really sensible that you start when you fire up the BetAngel screen and you first log in, you can log in live mode, or you can log in practice mode. And that will allow you to play away with your heart's content without any fear of doing any damage to your bank.
Yeah, I think it is always, obviously, butterfly effect. You never know what is going to happen until you're actually in the market, but the ability to paper trade, I think, can help mitigate some of those risk tolerance challenges that sometimes we can have when we're trying to go live with something. So I think it's a really, really good feature. Can I just confirm for anyone who wants to have a play, automation is only available in BetAngel Pro, right? Not
Correct.
BetAngel proper, or whatever you want to call the non-pro.
Yeah, we've got BetAngel Trader is fundamentally a manual, fundamentally a manual trading tool, and BetAngel Pro gives you all of the all singing, all dancing functionality.
Awesome. Are there other bits of the automation you want to share before we go to some questions? Or
yeah, I'll cover a couple of little items.
Yep.
I've just changed the screen layout here.
Yeah,
In Guardian, you've got a thing called the Guardian lists. This basically, you're not limited to display just the information that you see in Guardian. You can completely modify Guardian. And what we've done with the list that I've uploaded here is you can actually see it's specifying the geography. So it's looking at each of these individual courses. No.
Can I ask? Is that just a lookup that you've hard coded somewhere, or is it more dynamic than that?
I don't know if you remember me asking you. No, it isn't returned by the API. Do you remember me asking you for the list of courses?
I thought that was where it came from.
Yeah. So what we've done is we've created a piece of automation that will do string matching on the race course type. And then we've used that database that you kindly gave me and put it into a rules file.
Excellent.
And that's available to download on the forum. If anybody wants to download that, it's available to do that.
Beautiful. No, I mean, a lot of people in Australia will do things on a state-by-state basis. So that's really, really useful to be able to do. So thank you for making that easy.
Yeah, no problem at all. Probably the thing that I should sort of finish on is that Guardian itself, as I mentioned early on in this discussion, is for fully automating stuff. If you want to make it context sensitive, then you would use this little guy up here, which is a servant. So the concept of a servant is that it works exactly the same way as automation. You can apply a rules file to it, and then you can actually edit that rules file within the servant manager. But the concept here is that it's context sensitive. So you can see here it's saying control and left click, shift and left click, alt and left click. Basically what you would do is you create the automation, but you would actually say, run this automation based upon wherever my mouse is, or whichever. You can pre-program keystrokes if you want to as well. So you're not limited to just these keystrokes. You can use any keystroke you like. And the idea of running automation through a servant is that it's completely context driven. So you don't know which selection you want or which market you're going to run the automation on, but you know what you want the automation to do. Then you would run it through the servant. So it becomes completely context driven. So the servant is a way of achieving automation, but specifically you making that final decision as to exactly where you want to apply it.
You can also hook that up to the custom columns, can't you? In that example we had earlier.
Yeah. So if you want if you want to run a servant through a custom column, then you can basically look at this particular screen and then just click on a custom column and it will invoke the automation as well. So you've actually got several ways.
It's like you're casting a spell. That's a great word for it.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen the servant video that I did to promote it, but I'm in fancy dress. So if you want to understand the concept of servants, you can watch that video and laugh at me at the same time.
That's good fun. You've got to have a humor, right?
Absolutely. You can actually do nominated selections within the actual Guardian as well. So you've got many ways that you can implement any of these rules and create them so that they can be customized to a specific market. So you could actually run down an entire list of markets and then choose what automation you want to run and the selection on which you want to run it. But yeah, there is an awful lot to discuss here. So obviously I'm conscious that we're
run over a little bit. That's okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll sort of stop at that particular point. But if it requires that I come back and talk more specifically about one aspect or another, I'm happy to do that at some particular point.
Thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions here that I will query. So to the point about TPD, can you speak a little bit to what that data source is, what it includes, and what the integration with BetAngel allows or doesn't allow?
Yeah, probably the best way to do this is to sort of show or gather information from TPD. But basically, when you're using total performance data, what is actually happening is, before the race actually starts in the UK, they're putting GPS devices in the saddle cloths of the horses themselves. So you can actually get data from the horses before they actually even go to post effectively. And when the horses are active, the data is transmitted from the course. It will give you the speed of the horse, their stride length, and additional information related to that. So you can actually calculate where they are on the course, what speed they're running at, and how fast they're running as well, what their particular stride length is. So if you want to, you would find it underneath the conditions area here. So you can see there's a total performance data condition. And then you can actually see additional information in terms of, is the race course supported by total performance data or not. And then once you actually have the information, I'm just trying to think how to summarize this and make it sort of simplistic. In fact, even if I go into the Excel tab on BetAngel, this is probably an easier way of showing you some of the information that's available. This is the total performance data tab, which would connect you to their servers. But once the race is live, all of the information gets transmitted to you. But in Excel, you can actually see that you can create things like speed, position, distance to finish. That will allow you to pull in data that you can use within BetAngel itself as well. So, for example, one of the things that you can identify quite clearly is the start of a race, because the average speed, they transmit it in meters per second, but you can convert it to miles per hour if you wish. Obviously, the speed goes from 0 to 10, 20 miles an hour fairly quickly. And that will allow you to identify that the race has started. But also using things like the position, the stride length, and the distance to finish will tell you how far in front the favorite is from the second favorite, from the fifth, and so on. So it's giving you absolutely tons of information about exactly what's going on at each individual race. I don't know if that answers your question or not, or
yeah,
if you want
to a
something
large
more specific.
Yeah, my other question was, I know that from the feed, the raw feed, you can to a large extent extrapolate when it's about to jump, because you can see that all the horses are in the right places and they've been there for X amount of time, and you can probably extrapolate to a large extent that probably means that they're about to jump. Could you do an equivalent set of logic checks in here to, as we were saying before, how hard it can be to tell? Could you do the equivalent of they're all in the barriers now?
You can. So basically, when all of the horses are in the barriers, then their stride will be 0 because they're not moving, and their miles per hour will be less than 1 mile an hour. But obviously, as one horse is pulled forward, it's actually fascinating watching it. So I used the TPD data at Del Mar for the Breeders' Cup.
Yep.
And it was marvelous because the TV pictures from there have never been great, and the coverage sort of focuses on like who's dressed the best, and they're always talking about the other information other than what the horses are, and I want to see where the horses are and what they're doing. So it was a complete revelation for me for the first time ever to be able to use it at the Breeders' Cup last year.
Excellent.
But
I
yeah,
think it's really valuable.
The horses, when they're being brought forward to the barriers, will be moving at about 4 or 5 miles an hour, and then you see it drop to 0, and you see the stride length drop to 0, so you know that they must all be loaded. And then obviously away they sprint, and you can see it's interesting because you can see quite a big difference between when the race actually starts and what you can actually see on the TV itself. But I brought up a file here that we would use to populate the TPD data, so you can look at some of the data here that we would actually create that would come off the back end of total performance data. So basically, we're creating a variable that contains all of these individual items, and then we're deriving that from the total performance data that we're getting from the market itself. So you can see we can calculate many different things.
And the subscription, the one that gets integrated into BetAngel, because I know that if anyone wants that, they need to organise that separately, and then it feeds into BetAngel. Does that subscription only cover GBIR, or does it also cover US racing and the other jurisdictions that are in the TPD feed?
The basically, you've only got a number of TPD are running around trying to get racecourses to sign up to have their equipment installed on track. So it won't cover all UK racecourses, but it will cover a fair chunk of them. But that you also, there are none in Ireland, but there are some in the US.
Yeah.
So it's basically UK and
some US.
And US racing at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't know whether it included the US. That was the primary question. No, cool. That's really, really useful. Jumping across to sport. I know that there is integration with the tennis scores API that you've got.
Correct.
Got someone saying that it would be really useful to have additional points for sport. So there is obviously for tennis, if that's something that people want, they can access that through, again, it's Pro and on the other interface that you're on, obviously. Something I've never really played with is the soccer part of the tool. Does that provide any score data or time data, or what's the difference in that offering?
Yeah, we are always keen to integrate as many score feeds and additional data as we can. The biggest problem that we have is licensing. So, for example, on soccer, we seem to have a problem licensing data at a reasonable cost. However, BetAngel users are incredibly creative, and you can actually pull in soccer data via the automation and a CSV file. So there's actually so there's actually a file on the forum where somebody's demonstrated how to do this, or how to pull in data from third-party sites. So my answer to you on that is no, we don't have it natively, but it is perfectly possible to do it.
And look in the forum.
Yeah, and we're always keen to integrate as much as we possibly can, and simply because we don't have a full soccer data feed at this moment in time doesn't mean that we're not going to implement one at some point in the future. But there is a workaround.
Cool. In the interest of that feedback, so got several questions here around the ability to run multiple strategies within the software on the same account. So someone's saying, if you have several bots running on the same market and sometimes triggering around the same time on the same selection, and I think it speaks to the conversation we had earlier, but would you recommend setting up multiple linked Betfair accounts so they don't interfere with each other? And obviously you can't always get multiple Betfair accounts. So, and other people saying, paying extra commission across multiple accounts if you're on the same market is obviously not ideal. Someone else saying, if there were access to the customer strategy ref and maybe even a customer, what's the other one called? The customer reference, that would help with analysis and with trialing new things. Not necessarily asking for sort of direct response to any of that, but possibly in the spirit of feedback, it sounds like across this, there's definitely a lot of appetite from this group, at least, for the ability to do multiple things in the same place without having to go to multiple accounts and multiple sets of comm to do that.
Yeah, we have one of the difficulties that because we have looked at this, and one of the difficulties that we have is because BetAngel can run simultaneously across various different elements of it. It's a lot harder to implement than you would typically expect. So it is something that we have looked at, and it's not something that we have completely ruled out, but it's something that requires a little bit more work than it first sort of would appear. So maybe use your girlfriend's account for the short term.
Yeah, back to me, who is the one who gets everything closed because I'm the girl. No, good response. One last one on GB racing before we sort of wrap up. Do you have obviously you're active in the markets yourself, but do you have a read as to why the markets get so volatile immediately before race start? That sort of it's death knell.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because having been in the markets almost like from the day that everything sort of began, I've been able to see the evolution of the markets over a long period of time. And the markets haven't always been or behaved exactly the way that we see here. But when you look at the Australian markets, they're sort of moving in the same direction as the UK in terms of the way that they behave. But typically, my interpretation of what happens in that little period just before the start of the race is just that you, especially with horse racing, people very often don't want to commit stuff to the market unless if they're absolutely sure that the horse is behaving itself, as presenting to the barriers well, and sort of looks right. So that sort of crush of activity in those final moments tends to create that wobble within the market. And I think it's fair to say that over time, the markets have got more volatile. So they've become much more efficient in terms of the book percentage. It has been shrinking for as long as I can ever remember. And you can see that happening in Australia as well. But I think that therefore people sort of anticipate that and leave it a little bit later to put some of that activity into the market. So it is always look at things as an opportunity, is my mantra, simply because if you're looking for value or you're looking for a position to fill or for something to happen, the market is the market, whatever you try and do about it. Nobody is bigger than the market. So I think if you see a characteristic like that within the market, then I think there's an opportunity there to do something about it. I don't think necessarily you should view it as a negative. I think you just have to accept it for what it is. And my experience of the Australian markets is they're behaving much more like the UK markets than they were maybe 5 years ago. So I think that it seems to be part of the evolution of the market.
I definitely agree with that, and that they've matured a lot in the last few years. I definitely had people in the last 12 months that have come to me and go, you know, I tried greyhounds years ago and there was nothing on the exchange and I just assumed they were dead. You know, had a conversation, talked to some other people in the community, realized that actually they've changed, come in and I'm doing great. A bit like with BetAngel, that you don't know, just because you saw something 5 years ago doesn't mean that that's where it is now. I think that's super true when it comes to the Australian markets, especially in the last sort of 2-3 years, really changed up. In terms of the Australian market, final one before we sort of wrap up, do you have a favorite memory of trading Australian markets, a favorite experience?
Yeah, I think I've got lots actually. I think that I've had loads of good experiences in many different markets for many different reasons, but I think that probably the biggest highlight that I had recently was when you did the 0% commission on Caulfield Cup Day. Not last year, year before, I think it was, wasn't it? But yeah, that really lit up the markets so much so that I ended up phoning a friend of mine at like 3:30 in the morning to tell him to get out of bed and get behind his desk because everything was so good. Basically, there were markets like I've never seen before. But it's funny because I didn't really have any perception of the geography of Australia before I started trading Australian racing. And in the UK, we sort of navigate by pubs. So when you say to somebody, where should we meet? You sort of go, oh yeah, you know, at the old White Hart, I see you there at 6 o'clock. And my experience of Australia now is that if I go there now, I know where all of the race courses are. So I'd probably navigate by race course. And people would say to me, where do you live? And I'd go, is that near Eagle Farm or something?
Embarrassingly, I had exactly the same. I did a big drive through South Australia a couple of years ago before COVID, and going like, oh, I know that. I know where we are. This is all relative to the tracks. That's,
yeah. So it's no, I've had lots of fun actually, and it's just such a disadvantage for me that it's in the very early hours of the morning typically for me. So yeah, I use a bit of automation on it. Yeah. But during the big meetings, then I'll often get up and actively trade them. So we had all of the group racing just this weekend gone. So I couldn't resist doing some of that. And yeah, I think there are still plenty of opportunities. And I think you guys are doing a great job in Australia.
Thank you very much. We definitely try. Do you have a couple of other questions? But I might pop those in the Slack channel for you to have a look at when you've got time, if that's all right. The other thing that we were talking about offline was that you might be putting together a bit more in the way of educational content on a bit of that automation journey. I think that would be really popular within this group. So yeah, if and when that eventuates, do let us know, and we'll make sure we share that, because that I think will be of good value.
Yeah, and that's something that I need to do. So the peak season here sort of starts to kick off in April. So it's slightly quieter for me at this time of year. So hopefully I'll be able to get the opportunity to be able to get some of those written and across to you before we head into peak season here.
Excellent. No, I look forward to it. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Peter. That's been really valuable. And sometimes, like we said, all of this at one level is available online, but at another it's very intimidating. So having the opportunity to go through it in that sort of structure and see it from your perspective is really valuable. So thank you very much for sharing that. Like I said, I do have a few more questions that people have sent through that I'll pop in the Slack channel for your thoughts as and when you've got space. For those who are around, you go?
Yeah, no, I was just there's a lot that we could talk about, and it's obviously difficult to crunch it all into a small session. So I appreciate the time that you've given me, but also that there may be additional questions, or we may choose to cover some more stuff at some point in the future.
I definitely and really appreciate you taking the time, because at the end of the day, we can do our best to learn the tools and share the tools and to support them, but at the end of the day, obviously it's what you live and breathe, and it means you'll do a better job. So we really appreciate you coming and sharing that. That really helps. Thank you for taking time, particularly this time in the morning. Thank you very much. And for those in the audience who've stuck around for longer than normal, thank you very much. Looking forward, we've got some cool things coming up. So next month we're launching AFL season. So we've got an AFL themed meetup on the 16th of March. So the Eventbrite page should be up for that shortly. Got a couple of well-known names from the community joining us, which will be really cool. And the focus there is going to be how to model AFL if you don't watch it, as what I think is one of the most accessible sports for modeling, if you don't necessarily know what you're looking at. So make sure you put that in the diary. The other ones that I'm really excited about, I shared a little bit on Slack yesterday, but we've got Jared Tendler coming to join us for a couple of workshops. So that's the mental game coach behind the mental game of poker and trading. So I'm really excited about that. So there are going to be 2 dates, one in April, one in May. They'll be released really shortly, but I think they will be incredibly valuable. So I'm really looking forward to both of those, and I hope that you guys can join us. Just in summary, the thing that I like to just sort of come back and consider is what we do here is supposed to be fun. We're supposed to enjoy it. It's supposed to be healthy, and it's supposed to work in with the rest of what we do in the rest of our life. So please, always keep that in mind. Make sure you're doing what works for you, and always make sure you gamble responsibly for you and for us as well. Thank you again, Peter. Thanks, guys, and I will catch you next time. Have a good one. See ya.